ولذا فإننا اليوم جميعا بحكم الحاجة الملحة إلى مواجهة تغير المناخ نتحمل أكثر من أي وقت مضى مسؤولية تاريخية بخصوص ضرورة التحرك بسرعة لتدارك الوضع قبل فوات الأوان. ونحن في الجمهورية الإسلامية الموريتانية على الرغم من مساهمتنا الهامشية في الانبعاثات الحرارية نعيش يوميا الآثار المدمرة لهذا التغير المناخي عبر تنامي ظاهرة التصحر والفيضانات وانعكاساتها السلبية العميقة التي تضر بأنسجتنا الاجتماعية وتهدد أمننا الغذائي وتعيق تنميتنا الاقتصادية. واعتبارا لذلك بذلنا ونبذل جهودا كبيرة للتقيد بمقتضيات اتفاق باريس، وذلك من خلال مكافحة التصحر عبر مبادرة السور الأخضر الكبير والمساهمة النشطة في المناخ لمنطقة الساحل واعتماد ميثاق مبادرة الشرق الأوسط الأخضر التي أطلقتها المملكة العربية السعودية الشقيقة. كما اتخذنا إجراءات قوية في سبيل الحد من الانبعاثات الحرارية من قبيل فرض ضريبة على منتجيها داخل البلاد والاستثمار في زيادة مساحات المحميات البحرية والساحلية والقارية واستعادة الأراضي المتدهورة. كل هذا علاوة على ما نبذله من جهود كبيرة لسبيل استغلال مخزوننا الطاقوي المتجدد الذي يفوق 4000 جيجا وات بما يتيح لنا إنتاج الهيدروجين الأخضر وزيادة حصة الطاقات المتجددة في مجمل استهلاكنا الطاقوي والتي وصلت حتى الآن إلى 48% في هذه السنة مع التخطيط للوصول إلى نسبة 60% سنة 2030. وفي هذا الإطار نجدد دعوتنا للمؤسسات المالية والشركات المهتمة بدعمنا في هذا التوجه. ولا يسعني في هذا المقام إلا أن أؤكد على أن القارة الإفريقية كاتحاد وكدول تبذل جهودا كبيرة في سبيل الحد التدريجي من الاحتباس الحراري على الرغم من ضآلة إسهامها فيه، كما تتوسع في استخدام الطاقات المتجددة، وهو ما يستوجب دعمها بقوة في مجال تعزيز القدرة على التكيف والصمود في وجه الانعكاسات السلبية للتغيرات المناخية. لا بد من تعزيز التعاون والتضامن الدوليين وتعبئة تمويلات تكون على قدر التحدي مع مراعاة أولويات الدول الأقل نموا خاصة في القارة الإفريقية. وإنني أتمنى لأعمال دورتنا هذه كل نجاح وراجي بأن تسهم مخرجاتها في تعزيز وتنفيذ ما أعلن عنه في الدورة السابقة وفي تسريع تعبئة الموارد الضرورية لضمان فعالية جهودنا المشتركة في مواجهة مختلف التحديات المناخية. أشكركم والسلام عليكم.
Thank you, Your Excellency. It is my pleasure to welcome His Excellency Mr. Shavkat Mirziyoyev, President of Uzbekistan. Your Excellency, you have the floor.
Hurmatli delegatsiya rahbarlari, avvalambor Azerbaijan Respublikasi Prezidenti İlham Aliyev janob olilarining bugungi tarixiy konferensiyani go'zal Baku shahrida yuksak darajada tashkil etgani bilan samimiy tabriklayman. Biz Ozarbayjonning zamonaviy iqlim tahdidlariga qarshi kurashish yo'lida xalqaro hamkorlikni kengaytirish bo'yicha faol sa'y-harakatlarni to'liq qo'llab-quvvatlaymiz. Hurmatli sammit ishtirokchilari, iqlim o'zgarishlari bugungi kunda asosiy global tahdidga aylanib bormoqda. Geosiyosiy ziddiyatlar kuchayishiga bevosita ta'sir ko'rsatmoqda. Ayniqsa kambag'allikka qarshi kurash, oziq-ovqat va energetika xavfsizligi, suv va resurslardan foydalanish muammolarini kuchaytirmoqda. Bularning asoratlarini Markaziy Osiyoda o'tkir his qilmoqdamiz. Iqlim muammolari aholimizning turmush sifatini oshirish va milliy taraqqiyot strategiyalarini ro'yobga chiqarishda yangi to'siqqa aylanmoqda. Parij bitimi doirasidagi bosh maqsadimiz mintaqada havo haroratining jadal o'sishiga yo'l qo'ymaslik va joriy 100 yillikda 1,5-2 gradus atrofida saqlab qolishdir. Bu borada biz O'zbekistonda uglerod neytralligiga erishish bo'yicha keng miqyosdagi islohotlarni qat'iy olib boryapmiz. 2030-yilgacha havoga is gazi chiqarishni 35% ga kamaytirishni reja qilganmiz. Bu majburiyatni 2050-yilga qadar yanada kengaytirishga tayyormiz. Yashil energetika ulushi 40% gacha oshiramiz. Elektromobil va yashil vodorod klasterlari, quyosh va shamol generatsiya hublarini yaratyapmiz. Yashil makon dasturimiz doirasida ko'kalamzorlashtirish hududlarini keskin ko'paytirmoqdamiz. Qo'shni mamlakatlar bilan mintaqaviy iqlim strategiyasini hayotga tatbiq qilmoqdamiz. Shu kunlarda Yevropaga yashil energiya yetkazish bo'yicha ko'p tomonlama bitimni imzolaymiz. Hurmatli xonimlar va janoblar, O'zbekiston global iqlim o'zgarishlari oqibatlarini birgalikda bartaraf etishda o'zining amaliy hissasini kengaytirish niyatida. Birinchidan, rivojlanayotgan mamlakatlarga iqlim xatarlarini aniqlash uchun yetakchi davlatlar va xalqaro institutlarning texnik ko'magini kengaytirish dolzarbdir. Bu borada iqlim tufayli yo'qotish va zararlarni baholash bo'yicha xalqaro markaz ta'sis etishni taklif qilaman. Ikkinchidan, transchegaraviy suv resurslari ifloslanishining oldini olish va barqaror bioxilma-xillikning saqlashda yagona yondashuv zarur. Mintaqamiz misolida aytib o'tmoqchimanki, bir avlod ko'z o'ngida Orol dengizining butunlay yo'qolishi sayyoramiz miqyosida fojiaga aylandi. Shu o'rinda biz Birlashgan Millatlar Tashkiloti shafeligida daryo ekotizimlarining butunligi va ekologik xavfsizligini ta'minlash bo'yicha majburiyatlar to'g'risida deklaratsiyani ishlab chiqish tarafdorimiz. Uchinchidan, ko'p tomonlama yetakchi tizimlar ishtirokida o'simliklarning iqlim o'zgarishlariga chidamligini oshirish uchun genetik resurslarning mintaqaviy bankini ishga tushirishni reja qilganmiz. Dengizga chiqish imkon bo'lmagan davlatlar uchun yurtimizda Birlashgan Millatlar Tashkilotining innovatsion agrosanoat hubini yaratish tashabbusini ilgari suramiz. To'rtinchidan, iqlim o'zgarishlaridan zarar ko'rayotgan megapolis va shaharlarning barqaror rivojlanishi bo'yicha ilg'or bilim va amaliyot transferi uchun Jahon iqlim poytaxtlari alyansini tashkil etishni va uning birinchi forumini Toshkentda o'tkazishni taklif qilamiz. Beshinchidan, kelgusi yil 15-mayda Xalqaro iqlim kunini Orol bo'yi mintaqasida o'tkaziladigan raqamli yashil tashabbus global yoshlar festivaliga davlatlar vakillarini kutib qolamiz. Hurmatli sammit ishtirokchilari, O'zbekiston umumiy farovonlik va yashil taraqqiyot yo'lida ochiq muloqot va sheriklikka doim tayyor ekanini yana bir bor ta'kidlayman. E'tiboringiz uchun rahmat.
Thank you, Excellency. It is my pleasure to welcome His Excellency Mr. Umaro Sissoco Embalo, President of Guinea-Bissau. Your Excellency, you have the floor.
Signor Ilian Aliyev, Presidente da Repubblica di Azerbaijan, a 29ª Conferência da Convenção de Quadro das Nações Unidas sobre alterações climáticas acontece num momento de crise climática global que implica medidas urgentes e concertadas. Devemos ter a política de assumir as nossas responsabilidades e de coletivamente encarar os desafios atuais com o necessário espírito de cooperação e de solidariedade. Na Guiné-Bissau temos implementado uma série de ações estratégicas para mitigar os impactos climáticos e reforçar a resiliência das nossas comunidades. Iniciamos projetos de reflorestação e proteção dos mangais fundamentais para a preservação da biodiversidade e para a absorção de carbono. Estamos também a promover iniciativas de conservação da água e fortalecimento da agricultura sustentável. que consideramos setores críticos para garantir a segurança alimentar. Tais medidas reforçam as capacidades
promoting water conservation initiatives and strengthening sustainable agriculture, which we consider critical sectors to ensure food security. These measures enhance the adaptive capacities of our communities and ecosystems. We will intensify these efforts with new projects outlined in our national strategy. Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, we reaffirm the crucial role of multilateralism in the fight against climate change. We need cooperation to implement appropriate policies and to secure the climate financing that is required. The commitment of our partners and the support of the international community will be essential to ensure a fair and accessible energy transition respecting the principle of common but differentiated responsibilities. Regarding the commitments of this COP29, Guinea-Bissau reiterates its determination to carry out several actions, particularly in the following priority areas. Number one, adaptation and resilience. In this regard, international support is needed to continue to invest in programs that strengthen the resilience of our ecosystems and communities, mainly through biodiversity conservation and climate risk mitigation strategies. Number two, loss and damage. Given the climate consequences already being experienced in our country, we advocate for the full operationalization of the Warsaw loss and damage mechanism. We need financial resources to compensate for the damages caused by extreme climate events. Number three, climate financing. We remind everyone of the urgent need for fair and accessible climate financing for developing countries. Allocating adequate resources to vulnerable countries such as Guinea-Bissau is a priority and a necessary condition for enhancing resilience and adaptive capacity. We are committed, and this is number four, to developing renewable energy sources and reducing our dependence on fossil fuels, promoting a fair energy or just energy transition, rather, that directly benefits our populations. Distinguished delegates, excellencies, climate change knows no borders. We must act globally, and we must make bold decisions and take appropriate measures. Guinea-Bissau reaffirms its commitment to contributing to an adequate collective response for a resilient and sustainable future. We trust that the decisions made here in Baku will demonstrate our collective awareness of the serious dangers threatening the globe, as well as our common determination to adopt dynamic commitments in favor of climate justice, international solidarity, and sustainable development. It is our duty to express our will, unite our forces and resources to preserve our planet and to build a safer and more equitable world. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Your Excellency. It is my pleasure to welcome His Excellency Mr. Andrzej Duda, President of Poland. Your Excellency, you have the floor.
Distinguished Madam President, distinguished Mr. Secretary General, distinguished President Aliyev, distinguished Presidents, heads of the states and the governments, ladies and gentlemen, I warmly congratulate Minister Mukhtar Babayev on taking over this year's presidency of the 29th session of the Conference of the Parties of the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change. I thank His Excellency President Aliyev and the Republic of Azerbaijan for the organization of the event and for excellent hospitality. This is the last time that I attended the conference of the parties as President of the Republic of Poland. I'm pleased to be able to raise once again issues of such immense importance to our future. During my presidency in Poland, I have worked to keep the climate policy agenda high on my country's priority list. I'm glad that I had the pleasure to personally ratify the Paris Agreement in 2016. I also feel great satisfaction with the organization of COP29 in Katowice. It was, in my opinion, a landmark event in many ways. It was exactly in Katowice that we adopted the so-called Katowice Rule Book, a guide to implementing the tenet of the Paris Agreement. It was also there that the idea of the Declaration on Solidarity and Just Transition was born. Today, it constitutes the benchmark for energy and economic transformation across the world. Since then, I have consistently repeated that a just transition cannot take place against societies and to determine of the current living conditions. At the last year's COP28 in Dubai, I stressed that we still pay too little attention to the human dimension. And yet, a just transition must be carried out in a sensible way so that it benefits people in the first place. COP24 in Katowice also adopted a ministerial declaration, Forests for Climate, which highlighted the need to use forests in climate policy as natural sinks and reservoirs for greenhouse gases. Poland values the woodland and cares for them because they are also provide a home and habitat for many species of plants, animals and fungi living in Poland. Preserving biodiversity is a precondition for the existence of the life on Earth. I touched upon this issue in my speech at the UN preliminary session on biodiversity in 2020. Ladies and gentlemen, at a time of so many climate changes and threats, a key conclusion for us should be to strengthen synergies between the following conventions: the UNFCCC on climate, the UNCBD on biological diversity, and the UNCCD to combat desertification. It is also important to take joint action on mitigation, adaptation, combating soil degradation, and achieving climate neutrality. Let us also remember that our environmental efforts are being undermined by the wars going on in the world. Russian aggression against Ukraine has shown us that armed conflicts also result in serious environmental damage and pollution. Therefore, our actions must be comprehensive, because environmental protection is also conflict prevention. Excellencies, despite challenges, Poland fulfills all its obligations and is consistent in following the path of sustainable development and just transition. A year ago in Dubai, I mentioned Poland's plans and efforts to create a balanced energy mix that will ensure our energy security, along with the development of renewable energy sources. In Poland, the wind power sector continues to grow, and we have a surge in home and large-scale photovoltaic installations. At the same time, we are drilling more wells for the development of geothermal energy. A year ago, I also presented Poland's ambitions to build a stable nuclear power industry. I am glad that in Dubai, I was able to take part in the event accompanying the adoption of the Declaration of Tripling Nuclear Power Capacity. I signed it with full conviction because I believe that nuclear is the future. And it is only nuclear that will help us to achieve our climate goals and guarantee clean, safe and stable energy. We are an example of a country which for years has been able to ensure both a steady GDP growth and a decrease in the carbon intensity in our economy. This is the best confirmation that our actions are correct and that Poland is following the path of sustainable development set by the UN. Listening to the current and previously held speeches by other heads of state, I know that Polish solutions are appreciated in the world. I am glad that many Polish ideas, including mine, are being implemented by other countries. Let's cooperate and inspire each other in order to jointly bring about new pro-climate solutions that are beneficial to humans, the environment and the climate. Thank you.
Thank you, Your Excellency. It is my pleasure to welcome His Excellency, Mr. Emomali Rahmon, President of Tajikistan. Your Excellency, you have the floor.
Your Excellency, Chairperson, ladies and gentlemen, I would like to express my profound gratitude to the government of the Republic of Azerbaijan and the United Nations for the warm welcome and hosting today's event at a high level. Over the last 5 years, we have continuously witnessed the hottest years and months across all observation periods. According to experts' reports, 2024 is also recorded as the hottest year ever. We therefore need to significantly increase our efforts and actions to address climate issues. Distinguished audience, based on our green economy development strategy, we intend to fully transform energy production in the country to renewable sources by 2032 and to convert Tajikistan into a green country by 2037. Today, already 98% of our electricity is produced from hydropower, which is green energy. And Tajikistan, with its lowest indicators of greenhouse gas emissions, is ranked 130th in the world in terms of carbon dioxide emissions. Another important point I would like to draw your attention to is the nexus between water and climate. It is pleasing to note that the COP29 will adopt a declaration on water for climate action. In this regard, we must pay special attention to the accelerated melting of the glaciers, which is occurring due to the consequences of climate change. In this context, at the initiative of Tajikistan, the United Nations General Assembly declared the year 2025 as the Year of Glaciers Preservation. According to this resolution, the World Day of Glaciers has been proclaimed, and an international trust fund of glaciers preservation has been established under the United Nations. Tajikistan has contributed its share to this fund and calls on all partners to support this initiative. Furthermore, in accordance with this resolution, it has been decided to hold the high-level international conference on glacier preservation in Dushanbe in May 2025. As a part of this topic, at the initiative of Tajikistan and France, the UN General Assembly has declared the years 2025 to 2034 as the decade of action for supporting cryospheric sciences. Given the importance of these issues, I propose that under the auspices of the World Meteorological Organization and in cooperation with other development partners, a regional coordination center for glaciology be established in the city of Dushanbe. I thank you for your attention.
Thank you, Your Excellency. President of Iraq. Your Excellency, you have the floor.
أصحاب السعادة والفخامة والسمو والمعالي السيدات والسادة السلام عليكم ورحمة
Your Majesty and Excellencies, may the peace of God be with you. Today we convene for the 29th COP on climate change, a crucial conference which affects us all. But may I begin by expressing our deepest gratitude to the Republic of Azerbaijan for its warm welcome and hospitality. One year on from the constant bombing and incessant killings of women and children in Gaza, I call on the international community to bring about an immediate ceasefire and humanitarian aid to the victims and recognize the right of the Palestinian people to self-determination and to determine their own future with Al-Quds al-Jerusalem as its capital. Indeed, we hope that the discussions at this conference will culminate in proportionate decisions equal to the growing global challenges of climate change, such as the tragic flooding in densely populated area in Spain recently, with a huge loss of human life. And we extend our heartfelt condolences to the families of the victims. These challenges gravely affect the countries of the world, especially the developing countries, and they jeopardize their food security and social and health situation. And the impacts are very strongly felt in Iraq. We are suffering from record heat waves and increasing dust, sandstorms, and a reduction in farmland, and a reduction in biodiversity, and an increase in desertification and drought. Such climate change has also led to the displacement of ancestral historical communities, such as the Marsh people in Iraq, whose heritage and civilization may disappear as a result. Although the historic contribution of Iraq to global greenhouse gas emissions is very low, as is the case in most developing countries, we feel that climate justice must be at the heart of our discussions, because these are human rights, and we have an obligation not only to current generations but future generations whose survival will depend on the decisions we take now. And we trust that these negotiations will lead to tangible measures and clear and effective mechanisms, such as the Loss and Damage Fund, its activation after it was created last year. We reaffirm our commitment to the principles of fairness, equity, and common but differentiated responsibilities in facing climate change. Iraq depends a great deal on fossil fuels, and it's especially vulnerable to climate change and any measures taken to tackle it, which is why we call on the countries of the region affected by the same climate problems to establish a negotiating group to coordinate their efforts and to work hand in hand so that our collective contribution is greater than the sum of our parts. And on the same principle, we call on the major global economies to step up their commitments in support of climate action And if some of those economies decide to withdraw, then we call on the key players in those countries, whether they're political or private or public, to step up their commitments, because the world cannot progress towards sustainable development without the contribution of all. Iraq, ladies and gentlemen, is working to honor its commitments under the Convention and other international agreements related to climate in order to reduce its greenhouse gas emissions and to adapt to the impact of climate change, as well as to mitigate the effects, while also to bring about renewable transition. And we have restated our commitments under the Paris Agreement, and we've completed the preparation of a technological needs assessment and a national plan to define our climate technology needs in priority areas. We are also about to complete a climate investment plan to plot the course for public and private investors and meet our climate commitments through national and foreign investment and mobilizing financial resources to tackle climate change and move towards a more sustainable future. Iraq, after taking tangible measures to reduce methane emissions, is one of the first countries in OPEC to accede to the global pact on methane. And we are working for the Global Coalition for Clean Air and reduction of methane emissions, and we seek to eliminate the burning off of this gas between now and 2028. To conclude, I would like to remind the international community of the importance of its role in promoting regional peace and security in the Middle East. For a long time, we've suffered from conflict and tension in the region, and the economic and social consequences persist. Thank you very much, and may the blessings of God be with you. Thank you.
Thank you, Your Excellency. It is my pleasure to welcome His Excellency, Mr. Sadir.
Dear Chairman, dear ladies and gentlemen, against the backdrop of accelerating global climate change, we today must agree on coordinated, well-funded climate action to achieve the ambitions of the Paris Agreement. When we speak in the climate issue, we must unite regardless of relations between the countries of the world. We support the early adoption of the new collective quantitative goal on climate finance and call on development countries to raise amount of climate finance assistance to developing countries up to $2 trillion with easy access to this finance. For its part, Kyrgyzstan has initiated a mechanism for exchanging external debt for climate and sustainable development projects. We propose restructuring of the country's external public debt by applying the debt exchange mechanisms for specific green projects, including using the mechanisms of the Climate Trust Fund being created in Kyrgyzstan, which will finance projects in the fields of ecology and sustainable mountain development. We invite interested countries to join this fund. Taking the opportunity, I would like to express gratitude to Turkey and Germany, as these two countries have taken the decision to transfer debt to green projects. Dear ladies and gentlemen, in our country, we have a number of projects implemented in the field of renewable energy sources. Thus, together with our neighboring countries, a project has been launched in the region to build the largest hydropower plant, Kambarata 1. The climate context change, issues of inefficient use of water resources are becoming increasingly important. In this regard, we kindly request development partners to support our initiative to establish a regional center for the implementation of energy efficient and resource-saving technologies in Bishkek. Dear participants, We are witnessing intense melting of glaciers and reduction of the glacier cover, low water levels, and desertification. I would like to draw your attention to the fact that the life of people living in the downstream regions also depends on the process occurring in mountainous regions and ecosystems. Due to climate change, these water resources in the region are decreasing every year, negatively affecting water and energy, food security, and in general the socio-economic situation of all countries. Recognizing the importance of the issue of sustainable development of mountain regions, the UN General Assembly, on our initiative, adopted at its 77th session the resolution Sustainable Mountain Development, within the framework of which 2023-2027 is declared a 5-year action for mountain regions. I invite all participants to Kyrgyzstan and for the second Global Mountain Summit Bishkek Plus 25 in 2027, during which we will summarize the results of the Mountain 5 years. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you, Your Excellency. It is my pleasure to welcome His Excellency Mr. Denis Sassou Nguesso, President of Congo. Your Excellency, you have the floor.
Heads of State and Government, Mr. Secretary General of the United Nations, Mr. President of COP29, ladies and gentlemen, allow me to begin with words of congratulation to the Republic of Azerbaijan, to its President and government for their excellent organization of COP29. We extend to them our most sincere appreciation for the warm hospitality extended to my delegation and to myself. Ladies and gentlemen, the Republic of Congo, as most of you already know, has for almost a half a century taken full part in the global effort to tackle climate change and biodiversity loss. Indeed, my country has placed issues related to environmental conservation at the heart of its national policy and front and center in its international commitments. This year, in July, in Brazzaville, my country's capital, we hosted the first international conference on afforestation and reforestation. In our bid to deliver on our commitment and to strengthen the essential role of forests in regulating climate, and also in our bid to make the initiative for a global reforestation effort a permanent one, recently Congo submitted to the United Nations General Assembly a resolution on declaring a global decade of afforestation and reforestation. Furthermore, jointly with the group of African forest countries known as the C15, the Republic of the Congo is today carrying what can be styled as a climate justice initiative. This is an initiative which is aimed at including gross natural capital of countries in our calculation of states' GDP. Ladies and gentlemen, in 2015, we had all placed our hopes in the Paris Agreement. For this agreement, which is based on the principle of climate justice and the just transition, clearly establishes a global framework to tackle climate change and to keep global warming to under 1.5 degrees Celsius. We note with regret, however, that the financing mobilized since 2015 is not commensurate with our expectations and in no way corresponds to the level of our commitments. We're particularly concerned over the issue of climate financing, and here I must note that the commitment, or pledge rather, of $100 billion in 2009 for the period running 2010 to 2020 was fulfilled only in 2022. The new collective quantified goal for climate financing must be based on scientific data that take into account the impact and needs of developing countries in tackling climate change. Now, we know that these needs total over $1,000 billion. Our fervent wish is that the amount in this new goal will be established and defined from a perspective of climate justice and the just transition. This objective should enable our countries to reduce our debt burden rather than worsen it. Lastly, this new collective quantified goal should cover mitigation and adaptation in a balanced way. And in order to do so, substantial efforts must also be made to ensure that loss and damage are taken into account, because we must have substantial resources in place to tackle the impact of extreme events and to deal with any eventualities. And here I must welcome the fact that an encouraging step was taken here when we adopted here in Baku Article 6.4 of the Paris Agreement. We believe that this tool under the Paris Agreement, which enables us to transfer carbon credits between low greenhouse gas emitting countries and emitting countries, will open a pathway to interstate, international, and structured cooperation that will foster sustainable development, resilience, and economic diversification in developing countries. Ladies and gentlemen, the ecological transition which we all yearn for will not take place unless we have innovative financing mechanisms in place. Mechanisms that can help us open up new prospects for development based on resilience, sustainability, and on carbon neutrality. This is a challenge which we have before us here and now. Thank you.
Thank you, Your Excellency. It is my pleasure to welcome His Excellency Mr. Alexander Lukashenko, President of Belarus. Your Excellency, you have the floor.
Distinguished friends, much has been said about how much has been done in dealing with climate change, but I've followed events since the last conference, and things have only got worse. A war in the Middle East, a war in Ukraine, a war in the south of Yemen. There are more than 50 conflicts in the world which are having a harsh effect on the climate and on our planet. So what's got better? And who's started paying for the emissions? It's sufficient to say that today when there's been so much concern about the deterioration of the climate, all we see is people who are responsible for this are absent from this climate, and we've just had the presidential election in the United States. So the question is, how effective are our actions at such meetings when the president of France, which was the country responsible for the Paris Agreement, he's not even here. He feels it's not relevant. So there's nothing to be proud about at present, but what we can do is thank our Azerbaijani colleagues for the excellent organization of this summit. But what will come from the absence of people from this summit? It's not going to come from the United States. Recently, so many people died in Valencia, which shows what we're doing about improving the climate. But I have to say that there's nothing to hold against our country. We are strictly complying with all our obligations. But since there is this deep-seated bureaucracy in the UN Secretariat, it's almost impossible to say anything substantive. I will say just a few key things. The climate has changed. It's a fact of life, and therefore the prime task is to restructure national economies, first and foremost agriculture, to take into account of the changing conditions and adapt it to these difficulties. And we have experience which we're prepared to share. Secondly, there's a need to help the developing countries to secure equal access to green technologies without impairing their national interests, and so that they don't become enslaved as a result. And everything needs to be done to do away with those things which hamper international technology trade and exchange of innovation and best practice. Thirdly, we've already had to deal with a situation when new production, which is positioned as more environmentally safe, nonetheless does even more damage. And objectively, there's a need for new approaches to a comprehensive assessment of the potential impact of innovation on the environment throughout the entire life cycle of such production. This and other areas require a consolidation of international efforts, and not mere words but deeds. And therefore it's time to move from words to deeds. And those who have to pay must pay, and not hide in the shadows. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Your Excellency. It is my pleasure to welcome His Excellency Mr. Mohammed Yunus A. Menfi, President of Libya. Your Excellency, you have the floor.
بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. السيد.
Name of God the Merciful. Your Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, let me begin by thanking the government and people of the Republic of Azerbaijan for their generous hospitality. I also thank the President and for their wonderful organization of this conference. We greet you all well. Today, from our direct experience in Africa of climate events, that climate change is having a devastating effect on the planet, and this is imperiling the human development and lives. And our concerns for the future of current and future generations are even worse because of the increasing disasters leading to human and material loss. We notice that intensifying conflicts are intensifying, and we welcome the call for truce and to reduce military activities, and we encourage the presidency to renew this call each time for global peace. Ladies and gentlemen, 14 months ago, several regions in the Green Mountains experienced disasters that caused the loss of hundreds of lives. Today we can only note that we cannot deal with these disasters alone, which are often sudden disasters. We can only deal with them if we have financing that is easy to access and can respond to the situation in each state, as well as through the transfer of technology and techniques and by building national capacity as well. And if we allow the private sector to participate along with civil society in our countries in this endeavor, this can help improve lives, and we need a better approach to water security, and this can help strengthen our resilience to climate change. We reaffirm the need to look into the pledges undertaken by the developed countries under the UNFCCC with respect to transfer of technology, financing, and so on. Libyan cooperation announced the initiative following COP29 that we will be expanding the plant cover in Libya to reduce emissions and to capture carbon emissions. We believe we'll be able to achieve net zero by 2030, but also create a carbon credit bank. Like the other countries, we wish to deal with the financing gap. We need financing that will come from multiple sources, and we must enable access to financing through the World Bank, the IMF, and other IFIs, so that there will be access to credits, especially for adaptation and mitigation projects, so that these projects can actually become investment projects. We wish to reiterate our commitment, especially to education and for sharing best practices, and we stand determined to participate in any international effort to reduce greenhouse gas emissions and to strengthen biodiversity. Thank you.
Thank you, Your Excellency. It is my pleasure to welcome His Excellency, Mr. Rumen Radev, President of Bulgaria. Your Excellency, you have the floor.
Excellencies, let me first express my gratitude to our host, the Republic of Azerbaijan, and the Presidency of the Conference for organizing this significant event in times of political, security, and climate challenges all around the world. The continuity of our actions is crucial to deliver ambitious and balanced approach to achieve the climate goals in the complex geopolitical context. Agreeing on the achievable new collective quantitative goal on finance will be the main expected outcome of this conference. The new goal must provide financing from all possible sources, both public and private, to address the financing needs for mitigation and adaptation measures, focusing on the most vulnerable countries. At the same time, we must significantly strengthen the mitigation ambition and remain on the course of decarbonizing global energy systems. This can only happen if we embrace all available technologies, significantly improve energy efficiency, upgrade energy infrastructure, and ensure that energy security remains of utmost importance. Bulgaria is committed to not only be a part of regional energy cooperation initiatives, across Central and Eastern Europe, the Balkans and the Black Sea region, but also beyond, by strengthening the links between the European Union and non-EU countries who share our priorities on climate neutrality, just energy transition, energy security, and low-carbon technological innovation. As no region is spared from deadly and costly climate-related disasters, all parties should undertake greater efforts to integrate climate change adaptation and resilience into all policies and strategies. We call for continuing support for climate science and education. Bulgaria proudly hosted the IPCC session this summer. Science holds the key not just to reducing our carbon footprint, but also to improving human lives in an age of climate instability. Finally, let me conclude by reiterating Bulgaria's commitment to climate policy goals. We stand with all countries willing to strengthen climate diplomacy and regional cooperation, as only together we can achieve a better and resilient future for us and for the future generations. Thank you.
Thank you, Your Excellency. It is my pleasure to welcome His Excellency, Mr. Mohamed Muizu, President of Maldives. Your Excellency, you have the floor.
Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, I extend our gratitude to the government and people of Azerbaijan for the exceptional hospitality and leadership. We pledge our full support to ensure the success of this COP. We also congratulate the UAE for its successful COP29 presidency. Vulnerable, this is how the Maldives is often portrayed. But we are a nation of extraordinary fortitude. We speak not from desperation, but from a belief in the power of collective action. Our story is not of fragility, it is a testament to resilience, leadership, and international cooperation. Since hosting the first Small States Conference 35 years ago, we have called for stronger climate action. Our call has not changed. Our course has not strayed. Because for us, the environment and the ocean are more than resources. They are our cultural identity. Their protection remains our sacred duty. At COP28, I shared my vision for a climate-resilient Maldives. Despite formidable challenges, we are now seeing the dawn of hope. We recently launched our energy policy and roadmap, green initiatives to strengthen food security and affordable housing, and economic diversification through expanding port services, special economic zones, in addition to new development banking, unlocking new investment opportunities. We will soon unveil our 20-year vision, the blueprint for a sustainable, climate-resilient, developed nation by 2040. Mr. President, it is the lack of finance that inhibits our ambitions, which is why this COP, the finance COP, we need to deliver. The new climate finance goal must reflect the true scale of the climate crisis. The need is in trillions, not billions. It must consider the special circumstances of small island developing states. It must include adaptation, mitigation, and loss and damage, and increase contributions to it. As we approach the next round of nationally determined contributions, developed nations must increase their ambition to close the emissions and finance gap and align with the 1.5-degree goal. Mr. President, as we look around the globe, we see funds flowing freely to wage war, but scrutinized when it's for climate adaptation.
We need to reprioritize, revise the international financial system. We must choose the path that changes lives, not the climate. My delegation here is determined that the finance goal should be scored right here in Azerbaijan. Mr. President, 28 COPs later, emissions still rise, finance falls still short, and our hopes fails. Let us prove this time it will be different. I thank you.
Thank you, Your Excellency. It is my pleasure to welcome His Excellency, Mr. Faure Essozimna Nyasingbe, President of Togo. Your Excellency, you have the floor.
Excellences, Mesdames et
Your Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, heads of state and government, ladies and gentlemen, heads of delegations, distinguished delegates, ladies and gentlemen, we are here to recall a simple truth. Climate promises are no longer enough. Every year the urgency becomes greater, and every year we are approaching the point of no return, and it's important for our actions to reflect the urgency. To find our way there, I'd like to make two comments. Firstly, there's a need for genuine climate justice. That is, a shared but differentiated responsibilities among countries. Africa is paying the harshest price for climate change. We contribute small amounts in global emissions, but we incur the most severe impacts. It's our ecosystems of food security and our economies which are bearing the brunt of this crisis, and our need for climate justice can no longer be disregarded. As leaders, each and everyone's responsibility is to move beyond promises and start concrete action. Togo is ready to do its share. We've made major progress in terms of dealing with coastal erosion and reforestation and climate action based on renewed energies. But we cannot reverse the global trend alone. It is climate justice which should be the compass guiding all our discussions here, with major support funds being rolled out to support our populations and our biodiversity. This also requires that major emitters recognize once and for all explicitly this issue of climate justice in international agreements. The second point is that we need tailor-made solutions for African climate challenges. There are specificities in Africa regarding the climate crisis, as well as a disproportionate effort. And very often, the profiles in our countries are different from those elsewhere. We also need to recognize that climate adaptation poses unique challenges for developing economies and mostly rural populations. These specific challenges call for specific responses. We need solutions which are tailored to the realities of Africa, as well as mechanisms which are tailored to achieve the solutions. We cannot confine ourselves to generic, simplistic discussions or standardized solutions. That means financing the ecological regeneration of our coasts and redeveloping resilient rural infrastructure. It also means flexible forms of investment and funding which are flexible to help the developing countries, and making sure the investment is consistent with our other needs and commitments. So I therefore call for genuine climate solidarity where the financial commitments are kept and strengthened. Our solutions for climate must be thought in terms of investments in our collective future, not as temporary assistance. Thank you.
Thank you, Excellency. It is my pleasure to welcome Her Excellency, Dr. Hilda Heine, President of Marshall Islands. Your Excellency, you have the floor.
His Excellency Ilham Aliyev, President of Azerbaijan, His Excellency Antonio Guterres, UN Secretary General, COP29 President Mukhtar Babayev, distinguished heads of states and governments, heads of delegations, ladies and gentlemen. Yahweh, on behalf of the Republic of the Marshall Islands, it is an honor to once again participate in this critical summit. The Marshallese people are navigators. We are the descendants of those that found tiny strings of islands, atolls that just glance above the waves of the wide Pacific Ocean and made them our homes. Our forebears mapped the tides with sticks, coconut fronds, and shells. So it is in our blood to know when a tide is turning. And on climate, the tide is turning today. It is no longer a question of whether the energy transition will occur, but how. Will it be fair and inclusive? Will it be fast enough? Will those that defy our agreements to transition away from fossil fuels and go home to pump more oil, extract more gas, and mine more coal be held to account? Time will judge those that fail to make the transition. Some may fail because of denial and delusions, the misplaced idea that their country somehow will be immune, the fallacy that their short-term interests are worth the destruction on their doorstep, and that they will escape without blame. Other risks falling behind because they lack the resources to make the transition happen. In the Marshall Islands, we have a vision for a future with clean energy and the resilience to withstand climate impacts. But to make that vision a reality, we need much more money, and we need it much faster. Our National Adaptation Plan sets out a pathway for our entire nation to become resilient in the face of the climate crisis. As one of the most vulnerable places on the planet, every aspect of our lives will change, from infrastructure to education to healthcare to our economy and culture, to protect our right to live in our homelands and exercise our right to self-determination. We cannot do this by cobbling together project-based funding, waiting for support that takes years to arrive. By improving access, coordinating processes, and reducing choke points, donors can put decisions in our hands where they belong. We've shown that with cooperation, we deliver. In collaboration with Germany and South Korea, a new innovative low-carbon cargo ship, the Juranai, has joined our domestic fleet that will have 80% lower CO2 emissions than comparable ships. The Republic of the Marshall Islands will soon submit a new enhanced NDC. Let me be clear. We have only received half of the finance we need to deliver our last NDC. But we will develop and submit a new one because we know that this system only works when everyone continues to strive and plays their part. But those parts are not all equal. Our contribution to global emission is tiny. Major emitters, members of the G20, if we can do it, so can you. You can and must submit 1.5-degree aligned NDCs that set absolute economy-wide reduction targets and that cover all greenhouse gases and categories. The urgency of these commitments and the urgency to act on them before 2030 is paramount. The repercussions of low ambition and inaction will only get worse. We will be watching for 1.5 greenwashing. You can and must spell out to the rest of the world whose safety relies on your action, how you will deliver, and the energy goals set in Dubai last year. President and Excellencies, the winds are shifting too on climate finance. With the explosive increase in the cost of the climate crisis, it is obvious to everyone that the system isn't working. We can no longer afford to be unrealistic and unresponsive about the cost of the crisis, which we all know are in the trillions of dollars per year. Anyone who is here to fight over who pays for a small share of those needs rather than engage in a collective effort to find the trillions is no friend to islands like mine. Nor can we afford empty promises. Those that have benefited from extractions have an obligation to provide the climate finance that is desperately and urgently needed. We need a new collective quantified goal that sets us on a path to adapt and protect our communities, drive down our emissions, and respond to the ever-increasing loss and damage. That starts with making it crystal clear what climate finance is not. It is not market rate loans, and it's definitely not finance that funds fossil fuel production. Article 9 of the Paris Agreement contains specific protection for seeds that have never been operationalized. The new call must remedy this by ensuring a minimum floor of finance that flows to our islands. We can no longer afford to base our hope on an international financial architecture that holds us in the past, that perpetuates inequities. There is no shortage of proposals for how to reform these institutions. What has been missing is the willingness to make it happen. Excellencies, climate change threatens human rights. Every person on this planet has the right to a safe and healthy environment where they can thrive and have their dignity upheld. We must heed the voices of those that hold us to account and demand from us as governments the highest standards, and their rights must be respected. We won't succeed with the process and outcomes that are not inclusive. It is clear that women and children will suffer the most if we fail to stay within 1.5 degrees centigrade and to adapt. They must be part of the solution, from the community level to the international. We cannot afford to exclude Taiwan, a country which is under threat from the climate crisis, but also offers solution and innovation from this process. They deserve a seat at this table. Excellencies, it is time to fortify faith and trust in the process that we have created together to solve the climate crisis. The Paris Agreement is a beacon of hope that has guided change around the world. The success of this process does not depend on one country, but on all of us. We are here because we share a common commitment to solving the greatest challenge of our time. In our Marshallese culture and traditions, we have a saying, Wakuk Wachimor, which literally means we are all on the same canoe, and that we must all work together if we are to reach our destination. Our world demands that we steer our canoe of humanity to reach a future that is safe and secure for generations to come. Thank you to the government and generous people of Azerbaijan for hosting us here in the beautiful city of Baku. Komoltada, I thank you very much.
Thank you, Your Excellency. It is my pleasure to welcome His Excellency, Mr. Nikos Christodoulidis, President of Cyprus. Your Excellency, you have the floor.
Excellencies, at the outset, I would like to extend my gratitude to the government of Azerbaijan for hosting COP29. Today, the goals and attention is focused on our deliberations here in Baku, as the outcomes of this conference are critical to our shared commitment to securing a sustainable future for our planet. Dear friends, I address you today with feelings of honor, but also of great concern. We stand at a critical juncture as the impacts of climate change are intensifying with alarming speed. In the Mediterranean region, we are witnessing a rise in extreme weather events. raging wildfires, severe and prolonged droughts, extreme heats, sea level rise and catastrophic, deadly flooding, as we very recently saw happening in Spain. Speaking also from my own country experience, these extreme weather events are impacting our ecosystem, our economies, including agriculture and tourism, our communities and the quality of life of our people. They act as a stark warning and also are highlighting the urgent need for decisive, coordinated action. We need immediate, targeted responses at both the national and regional levels. My country has taken proactive steps by implementing a national adaptation strategy since 2017. We are currently updating this strategy in order to strengthen our capacity to manage complex and interlinked climate risk. Despite our small carbon footprint, Cyprus is committed to contributing to global emissions reduction. Within the European Union framework, we submitted an enhanced nationally determined contribution in 2020, pledging to reduce greenhouse gas emissions by at least 55% by 2020 compared to the 1990 levels, and the European Union as a whole remains resolute in its legally binding commitment to achieve net zero emissions by 2050. At regional level, my country recently relaunched the Eastern Mediterranean and Middle East Climate Change Initiative, aiming to develop synergies to mitigate the impact of climate change with focus on cross-border projects. Dear friends, it is crystal clear that government action alone is not enough. We also need to engage our societies, our citizens, our businesses in this collective mission and fundamentally rethink the relationship between our economies and nature. Green investments, the transformation of the energy and industrial sectors, and the eventual decarbonization across sectors can be the answer to more competitive and healthier markets. Excellencies, as I already stressed, only by acting collectively with urgency and ambition we can avert the most severe consequences of climate change. With this in mind, we need to successfully conclude COP29 with a determined and forward-looking outcome, crystallizing pathways and opportunities for climate resilient and sustainable development. Before closing, dear friends, I would like to acknowledge the importance of youth. Young voices have been instrumental in pushing for an ambitious climate agenda. Let's hear their voices and let's heed their call. If we ignore these voices, our children and grandchildren will inherit a climate and natural dystopia. Let us resolutely walk together the path of climate neutrality. Only together we can build resilient, sustainable and green societies for the generations that will inherit our planet. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Your Excellency. It is my pleasure to welcome His Excellency Mr. Peter Pellegrini, President of Slovakia. Your Excellency, you have the floor.
Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, this year my country, Slovakia, as others in Europe, has experienced the hottest summer on record. It brought heavy rains and devastating floods. The greenhouse gas concentrations are the highest in the humankind. We have crossed critical 1.5 Celsius degrees in 12 consecutive months. And this gives us a real taste of what the planet can become. Climate change accelerates, so it's the detrimental effects on our planet. Longer we wait, more we can lose in terms of lives, ecosystems and economies. Esteemed colleagues, in face of climate change danger, every single country is too small. True commitment of all to multilateralism is badly needed. Let us ask, can we succeed without all the biggest economies and polluters stepping up? Developing countries need our solidarity. Can they succeed if our approach to financing and its contributors remain the same? Everyone needs to speed up. My country does. We cut our emissions by almost 50% since 1990. In the energy sector, we shut down our last coal mine in 2023 and remaining 2 coal power plants recently. It's a big step towards full phase-out of coal from our power generation. At this COP, Slovakia joins the call to action for no new coal. Soon, my country's electricity will come from low-emission sources by 90%, mainly nuclear and renewables. We will also become its net exporter, and already we help Ukraine, which lacks electricity due to Russian aggression. For Slovakia, the second largest producer in Europe, nuclear is crucial on path towards neutrality. In innovations, we want to go beyond small modular reactors. Only around 40% of nuclear fuel we can turn into energy in current large-scale reactors. We want to become leader in multiple reuse of this spent fuel. This could be a real breakthrough in energy security or costly nuclear waste storage. We could secure enough energy for many generations to come. Till the end of this decade, my country plans to reduce emissions at least by 55%. To achieve it, we will invest €14 billion to decarbonize sectors, increase renewables, and to advance our resilience. I am an advocate of the rational choice that do not harm the working people, the most vulnerable, our competitiveness and prosperity. If we lose trust of our citizens as politicians, we cannot succeed. Slovakia pledged to contribute €2.2 million to the Green Climate Fund by 2027. Our climate finance grow. It helps our developing partners to build their cleaner future and their resilience to climate adversity. Colleagues, I wish this COP and its presidency a progress towards meaningful climate action in line with the global stocktake along all standards of the Paris Agreement for sustainable well-being of and at our planet. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Your Excellency. It is my pleasure to welcome His Excellency, Mr. Charles Michel, President of the European Council, speaking on behalf of the European Union. Your Excellency, you have the floor.
Heads of State and Government, Heads of Delegation, Your Excellencies, in your respective capacities, the world is on the razor's edge. Russia's war of aggression against Ukraine, the war in Gaza, and the tragic crisis in the Middle East, civil war in Sudan. These conflicts and many others are leading to humanitarian disasters for civilian populations and are polarizing societies across the world. Violent imperialism, endless cycles of vengeance and collective punishment are poisons that are imperiling us all. The European Union believes deeply in a world that is rules-based, the strength of law and not the law of strength. Ladies and gentlemen, each week somewhere in the world we have to deal with the devastating consequences of climate change. This climate threat is an existential threat to humanity, and it is our responsibility as human beings to wage for this war against nature, and some are more responsible than others, and they are known as the developed countries. And this is how the Paris Agreement should be our peace treaty with nature. The principle of cooperation should govern our implementation of this agreement. Boldness rather than procrastination, solidarity instead of selfishness, ambition instead of surrender. We must go for the survival instinct rather than burying our heads in the sand. You can count on the European Union. We are stepping up to the plate with financing, $31 billion. That is more than our fair share, and we are calling on everyone to follow our example, including the G7 emerging countries. We stress the need to broaden the donor base, and we must have more contributors. We must meet this ambitious objective. We support a multi-track approach, and we must use carbon pricing as a lever, and we must use development banks to mobilize this agreement. The euro is the currency of the climate, and we are determined to support developing countries, and we are doing so with our partnership for an equitable and just energy transition. South Africa and other countries, along with Indonesia, are the ones that we're supporting. A few weeks ago, in New York, we went against the grain and we agreed on the pact for the future at a dark moment for multilateralism. And this is a ray of hope. And we hope that this COP will be one of confidence, determination, and the COP that will walk the talk. You can count on the European Union. Thank you.
It is my pleasure to welcome Her Excellency Ms. Gordana Swiatek Daskova, President of North Macedonia. Your Excellency, you have the floor.
Mr. President, Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, let me thank the Republic of Azerbaijan and President Aliyev for hosting, in my opinion, this urgent conference. We have gathered at COP29 in the midst of a war. The good news is, some would say, that the aggressor is already suffering heavy losses and will most probably lose the war. The bad news is that the aggressor is humankind itself, with its unsustainable production systems and consumer habits. Unless we hold global warming below 1.5 degrees by 2050, instead of sustainability and growth, we will have to think about habitability and survival. In this war against nature, it is the innocent, the children, the vulnerable populations and small developing nations who often suffer most. Situated in one of the most climate vulnerable regions in the world, the Mediterranean, we must adapt our security, defense, energy, health, tourism, water, educational and other systems to this multidimensional challenge, making them inclusive to women, children and youth. We have endorsed the declarations on enhanced action in tourism and on water for climate action. In addition, I have appointed a climate expert in my National Security Council, and we have joined the group of friends on climate and security. Our goal is to accelerate the transition to a low-carbon economy across all sectors, including energy, transport, industry and agriculture. To achieve green growth, we will invest in green jobs and reskill workers, moving away from carbon-based energy production. Sustainable energy transition must be environmentally and socially just. We adopted a long climate action. We will introduce a legal framework for monitoring, reporting, verification and accreditation. In parallel, we will adopt a revised law on energy and a new law on renewables. These laws support the implementation of the challenging green agenda and sustainable connectivity cluster in EU membership negotiations, requiring €3.1 billion for renewable energy and energy efficiency. The Economic and Investment Plan and the Green Agenda for the Western Balkans provide funding for this. Regardless of progress in the EU accession process, countries should have ongoing access to climate action funds before membership. Esteemed Excellencies, we need a peace agreement, a natural contract, as Michel Serra would say, to stop treating nature as adversary and start treating it as partner. The Paris Agreement, the SDGs, and are the blueprint of that peace agreement, of that natural contract. Let's implement them in the line with the principle Pacta sunt servanda.
Thank you, Your Excellency. It is my pleasure to welcome His Excellency, Mr. Alexander Stubb, President of Finland. Your Excellency, you have the floor.
Thank you, Madam Chair, ladies and gentlemen, Excellencies and colleagues. In the age of multipolarity, we probably need multilateralism more than ever. And I guess climate change is a litmus test for multilateralism. And the reason for that is quite simple. If we fail this test, efforts to address any kind of global challenges, say sustainable development, technology or demography, will all be in vain. And of course, if we fail to limit the increase of global temperature, future generations will be left with a world which has more pandemics, more hunger and more conflict. Now, at the same time, we must of course ensure that climate action is aligned with the broader development agenda. And I don't say the following thing just because I have a daughter of 23 years old, but I do want to emphasize the importance of women and youth in the fight against climate change. And in many ways the choice is actually quite binary, it's black and white. You can have either multipolar and transactional disorder or multilateral cooperative order. Without changing the current power balance, I'm afraid the former will prevail over the latter. Now, the growing influence of formats such as G20, where representation better reflects the global realities, is of course welcome. But taking on more power in global decision-making should also mean taking more responsibility. Countries which seek to upgrade their global influence to reflect modern realities cannot demand that global responsibilities are forever based on circumstances in the early 1990s. So therefore, the largest emitters and the largest economies will determine the direction of the whole planet. Reflecting on these developments, I would like to underline 3 points where I think COP29 is pivotal. First, we all have to take more responsibility for reducing emissions. Last year in Dubai, we took the crucial step by agreeing on the transition away from fossil fuels. Now we need to turn our promises into practice as we prepare our new nationally determined contributions ahead of COP30 in Belém. It's crucial that especially the G20 members show leadership by setting the most ambitious targets possible in line with the 1.5 degrees limit. Second, we all have to take more responsibility for climate finance. The new collective quantified goal needs to be both ambitious and achievable. It has to reflect the current global economy and sources of emission, not the situation more than 30 years ago. I'm pleased to announce that Finland will be providing additional funding to the Systematic Observations Finance Facility to help strengthen adaptation and build resilience, especially in the least developed countries and small island developing stage. And let me conclude by saying that we actually need three things simultaneously. We need targets and legislation, we need finance, both public and private, and we need technological innovations. And the bottom line is that we need all three of them together. We cannot regulate ourselves out of this crisis, we cannot pay ourselves out of this crisis, but we can innovate ourselves from this crisis. Here in Baku, I'm really looking forward to explore all of these things achieved together. And whenever in the future I hear that gong, I shall take it as a symbol for the urgency we have to fight climate change. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Your Excellency. It is my pleasure to welcome His Excellency Jakov Milatovic, President of Montenegro. Your Excellency, you have the floor.
Thank you, Chair. Your Excellencies, it is a profound honor to participate on behalf of Montenegro in this distinguished gathering. COP29 is taking place at a crucial time. The data from the UN agencies are showing that 2024 is on track to be the hottest year on record. The negative consequences of the climate change are increasingly impacting communities worldwide, with Montenegro being no exception, thus underscoring the urgent need for climate action. Since the early 1990s, Montenegro's commitment to aligning national policies with international sustainability standards has been evident, especially when the country became the first nation in the world to establish its status as an ecological state within our own constitution, thus pledging to integrate all environmental considerations across areas of national governance. Although our share in global CO2 emissions is negligible and Montenegro's contribution to environmental goals may seem modest in a global context, this does not exempt us from the responsibility to contribute to collective efforts towards carbon neutrality. As an EU candidate country, Montenegro aligns its policies with those of the EU, and as such, we have committed to sharing the climate ambition expressed in the European Green Agenda. Through our NDCs, Montenegro has pledged to reduce greenhouse gas emissions by 35% by 2030 compared to 1990 levels. And as the goal is assessed to have been already achieved, the country is planning to raise the target to 55%, while the policymakers are actively exploring ways to further enhance this goal. In parallel, Montenegro is actively investing in renewable energy infrastructure, including the development of wind farms and solar energy panels, while the plans for doubling the capacity of the undersea electricity connection with Italy is already being planned, thus positioning Montenegro as a unique link between the Balkan and Italian electricity systems. The country is accelerating the implementation of energy efficiency initiatives, especially within public institutions, and these efforts are being supported by major international organizations. Montenegro has also emerged as a regional leader in innovative financing mechanisms for sustainable development. Building on existing institutions like the Eco Fund, the country has, in partnership with the UN office in Montenegro, introduced what we call Sustainable Development Goals Acceleration Fund, thus creating a unique and powerful tool for fostering partnerships that represent a new generation of financing for SDGs. Ladies and gentlemen, to conclude, on the path to carbon neutrality, we must remain committed to just transition. Dear colleagues, time is the most precious resource at our disposal, and every day counts as crucial in our collective pursuit of a climate-resilient economy. Collaboration is essential in this endeavour, so I urge us all to leave this event with a renewed sense of urgency and commitment. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Your Excellency. It is my pleasure to welcome His Excellency Mr. Ramchandra Paldel, President of Nepal. Your Excellency, you have the floor.
Mr. President, Excellencies, distinguished delegates, ladies and gentlemen. Mr. President, climate justice and climate finance, including reparations for loss and damage, are my paramount concerns today. Even though Nepal's carbon emission is negligible, we are suffering terrible consequences of global warming and climate change. In fact, we are reeling from some recent climate-related disasters, glacial lake outbursts and devastating floods that caused damages worth tens of billions of rupees. The scale of destruction is so immense that recovery and reconstruction present a severe challenge given our limited resources and capacity. Climate change has affected the whole planet, but its impacts have been especially severe in poor, least developed, developing nations and SEEDs. Mr. President, Nepal is committed to utilize natural resources sustainably and prudently. As we implement our ambitious emission reduction targets set out in the second NDC, contributing to the global well-being and protection of Mother Earth, we have increased forest cover and enhanced production and supply of clean energy, to mention a few of our efforts. But the challenges precipitated by global warming and climate change far exceed our capacity and resources to manage them. Mr. President, we are compelled to divert our meager resources, originally allocated for poverty reduction, towards adaptation and mitigation, which is a grave injustice. Urgent implementation of polluters pay and compensate principle is critical, and they must also take responsibility for reducing emissions. While the pledges for climate funds have been insufficient to begin with, they have also remained unmet. It is even more distressing to note that the targeted communities do not receive the funds due to complicated processes. In this regard, I also call for urgent operationalization of the Loss and Damage Fund, which is intended to support the vulnerable developing countries. Climate finance must recognize the contributions of countries like Nepal in protecting biodiversity, the Himalayan cryosphere, as well as in supplying fresh water. These nations must also be adequately compensated for climate-related loss and damage. I also call for technology transfer and adequate capacity building grants in accordance with the Paris Agreement and the commitment of developed countries. Climate finance must be provided in the form of grants, and this should be disbursed through national treasuries to ensure effectiveness. Mr. President, the vast resources spent for the arms should instead be redirected for adaptation and mitigation efforts to protect human civilization and bequeath a habitable planet to future generations. I hope this conference will make concrete progress towards setting out a clear NCQG based on the principle of climate justice, equity and capacity, towards limiting global warming to 1.5 degrees, and towards ensuring climate justice and sustainable development of least developed and Himalayan nations. As the snow-capped white mountains turn into black rocks, the world needs to recognize that the effects are not limited to the mountainous nations, but also extend to the coastal ones. Therefore, it is high time we formulate and implement integrated and holistic adaptation strategies that link mountains to the sea. Nepal is organizing Sagarmatha Sambad Everest Dialogue to advance this important concept. Finally, I reiterate that protecting Himalayas is protecting ourselves and entire humanity across the planet. Thank you for your attention.
It is my pleasure to welcome His Excellency Mr. Chandrika Prasad Santokhi, President of Suriname. His Excellency, you have the floor.
Thank you, Madam President. Good afternoon. As President, I'm here today to inform the COP that my country, Suriname, a member of CARICOM, a carbon-negative nation, rich in natural resources, is on a path of sustainable green development strategy and is a determined advocate in the fight against climate change. Our vast forests, still covering 93% of our territory, act as a vital carbon sink, absorbing more carbon dioxide than our economy emits, and we are committed to stay carbon negative. CARICOM and CIS nations are facing the injustice of a crisis they didn't cause, a crisis they cannot solve alone, even with their best efforts to cut their emissions, which are now lower than 1%. Developed countries must act now to support the resilience and transition of developing nations. We as CARICOM leaders are committed to stay below 1.5 degrees this century as pledged, and we ask you all to do your part. My country will continue to contribute to our green transition, adapt to climate impacts, and achieve our sustainable development goals through a green development strategy, leaving no one behind. A balanced and responsible exploitation of the oil and gas sector after the announcement of the FID recently will be an integral part of this strategy. Suriname's strong commitment to environmental leadership is evident through our leading position in the Environmental Performance Index in Latin America and being the first country to develop internationally transferred mitigation outcomes, ITMOs. Madam President, most CARICOM states lack the financial capacity and resources to recover from escalating climate impacts. Outdated GDP-based criteria keep concessional financing out of the reach of many of us, despite adoption of the Multidimensional Vulnerability Index at the United Nations. Yet, international financial institutions have not implemented it. CARICOM calls for a binding commitment to allocate at least 15% of climate finance to CITs instead of the unacceptable 1.5% CITs now receive. We call for easier, more tailored access to climate financing for CITs, including simplified applications, capacity building, direct funding, and affordable financing. Developed nations have a duty to support those less responsible and more vulnerable to climate change, requiring immediate action to correct this imbalance and climate injustice. The Loss and Damage Fund must be made functional and effective urgently. This must be fixed in 2025. Without significant increases in climate finance, CITs cannot adapt the climate impacts or achieve sustainable development. Inaction threatens their very existence. Finally, Mr. President, it is time to take bold action now to help such confront the urgent threat of climate change. I thank you, and may God bless you all. Thank you.
Thank you, Your Excellency. It is my pleasure to welcome His Excellency, Mr. Denis Bersirovic, Chairman of the Presidency of Bosnia and Herzegovina. Your Excellency, you have the floor.
Distinguished Madam President, ladies and gentlemen, first of all, let me thank to host Azerbaijan and United Nations for organizing this important conference. The state of our planet is alarming. Accelerated climate changes are the result of irresponsible human actions. By industrializing the earth, man endangered nature and thus endangered himself. The path our civilization is currently on is leading to catastrophe. One of the key problems today is the complete erosion of morale. We are witnessing that some big countries preach heaven but practice hell. Because of such policy, both people and nature are suffering. One of the biggest obstacles in the fight against the climate crisis is state egoism. Unfortunately, certain countries consider that this is not a critical issue for the current generation and choose to defer its resolution to future generations. This mindset is deeply wrong. The challenges are different for each of our countries, but the goal is the same. Let's be on the same side in the fight against the climate crisis. The growing climate crisis requires us to make changes in our value system. To mitigate the climate crisis, we need to focus, among other things, on more responsible policies that promote nature protection, improvement of green financing standards, strengthening climate diplomacy, educational programs that will encourage climate innovation, and empowering a new generation of climate leaders. Bosnia and Herzegovina is determined to contribute to the reduction of greenhouse gas emissions, achieve climate neutrality, carry out the energy transition, and to contribute to the implementation of the Paris Agreement on climate change. Bosnia and Herzegovina is actively working on the adoption of the Integrated National Energy and Climate Plan. The document outlines Bosnia and Herzegovina's strategic determination, direction in the process of decarbonization of the energy sector until 2030, with a clear vision to 2050. Finally, let's not forget, the earth does not belong to humans, but humans belong to the earth. Let's continue our fight against climate change. It is a fight for our future. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you, Your Excellency. It is my pleasure to welcome His Excellency Nana Addo Danwa Kufu-Addo, President of Ghana. Your Excellency, you have the floor.
Chairperson, Excellencies, distinguished leaders, Ghana thanks Azerbaijan for her warm welcome and congratulates her for assuming the chairmanship of COP with dedication to our shared future, as I attend COP for the last time as President of the Republic of Ghana. Today we gather not merely as leaders or policymakers, but as individuals bound by our love for our lands and future generations. We're here to declare we stand in solidarity for a green world. For Ghana, climate change is real and immediate, affecting our farmers, coastlines, and communities. Rising temperatures and unpredictable weather threaten our livelihoods daily. Yet we respond with resilience and commitment. In 2021, Ghana submitted updated nationally determined contributions to the United Nations, encompassing 47 programs to mitigate and adapt to climate impacts. Our goal is to cut emissions by 64 million metric tons by 2030, demanding investments between 10 and 15 billion United States dollars. Despite financial and technical hurdles, we're determined to meet the Paris Agreement's goals across agriculture, transport, forestry, energy, and other sectors. We have made strides. The Green Ghana project has planted 50 million trees, and forest restoration efforts have covered 721,000 hectares since 2017 when I came to office. 13 mitigation actions have cut annual greenhouse gas emissions by 43% since 2021. Ghana's national electric vehicle policy, backed by tax incentives, promotes sustainable mobility, and our energy transition framework steers us towards a green future. Through Article 6 of the Paris Agreement, Ghana has mobilized 800 million United States dollars by trading carbon credits with nations like Switzerland and Sweden. However, we cannot reach our climate goals alone. We call on our global partners to honor their commitments, ensuring accessible concessional financing for sustainable development in Africa without unsustainable debt. As a father and a grandfather, I question what we will leave behind. What world will we leave behind? Our children's future hinges on our decisions. Let COP29 here in Azerbaijan mark a pivotal shift from dialogue to decisive action. Let us act boldly, showing future generations that we fought for them. Ghana stands united with the world for a green, resilient tomorrow. Madam Chair, thank you very much.
Thank you, Your Excellency. It is my pleasure to welcome His Excellency Mr. Kurulsuk Akna, President of Mongolia. Your Excellency, you have the floor.
His Excellency Mr. Ilham Aliyev, President of the Republic of Azerbaijan, Mr. Antonio Guterres, Secretary General of the United Nations, distinguished delegates, ladies and gentlemen. At a time when climate change is accelerating due to both natural forces and human actions, adversely impacting on sustainable development, livelihood, and human well-being worldwide, we need to strengthen our political leadership, collective efforts, and activities. The United Nations continues to warn us that the chance to meet the commitments under the Paris Agreement is gradually diminishing. We must heed the words of the United Nations Secretary General Antonio Guterres, who emphasized it as a canyon littered with broken promises, broken lives, and broken records. All of this signifies a failure of leadership, a betrayal of the vulnerable, and a massive missed opportunity. Hence, today, humanity should unite for our common future with shared goals of treating the Mother Nature with utmost compassion and respect, rather than subjugating her. And in order to every country To achieve more tangible results, it is necessary to strengthen national consensus, common policy, and mutual understanding involving all social groups, including government, private sector, civil society. If humankind does not take decisive actions to protect the Mother Earth, tackle the issues of climate change, land degradation, and biodiversity loss, the planet will find her own way to survive regardless of our presence. Harmonious coexistence with Mother Nature is the foundation of human existence. We should never forget that. Particularly, owing the elevated debt levels, constrained domestic budgets, and limited financial resources, developing countries and those vulnerable to climate change face with financial risks in successfully fulfilling their obligations and commitments under the Paris Agreement. Therefore, I would like to emphasize that the world leaders need to take up into consideration the priorities and needs of countries, especially developing countries, and support and adopt the new collective quantified goal for climate finance at this 29th session of the Conference of the Parties to the UN Framework Convention on Climate Change, which will significantly increase climate finance. In order to successfully fulfill its commitments under the Paris Agreement, Mongolia needs to financing equal to approximately 50% of its GDP. In this regard, to enhance financing and investment in renewable energy, green agriculture, and forestry, our country is undertaking a comprehensive reform aimed at improving the legal and business environment. As such, within the framework of the Blue International Movement, Mongolia has expanded its international cooperation and investment while establishing a project finance for permanence for nature conservation called Eternal Mongolia. Mr. President, according to the study conducted by the UN movement, if the global community fails to meet its climate change mitigation goals by 2050, it may push up to 160 million more women and girls into poverty, and food insecurity may affect up to 240 million more women and girls. Therefore, Mongolia successfully hosted the World Women's Forum under the theme Towards Green Future in August this year and adopted the Ulaanbaatar Declaration Towards a Sustainable Future, calling the countries around the world to promote women's participation and leadership in the fight against climate change. Moreover, Mongolia is putting forward an initiative to establish a global coalition on sustainable rangelands and pastoralists for the future at a time when climate change is detrimental impact the country's wide traditional pastoralism. I'm confident that this initiative will contribute to the implementation of the resolution adopted by the UN Secretary General UNGA declaring the International Year of Cooperatives in 2025 and the International Year of Rangelands of Pastoralists in 2026, and as well as the preparation of the 17th UNCCD COP in Ulaanbaatar in 2026. May the eternal blue sky bless us, the humanity forever. May the world be at peace. I thank you very much for your attention.
President of
So it's essential for the Paris Agreement to be respected because this is the fundamental global convention for combating climate change. Indeed, climate change is a key priority for Sudan because it is vital to deal with it for our national development. Our country is facing aggression, whether it is from the rapid response militia, rebels, and all the consequences stemming therefrom such aggression. But these aggressions have an impact on people and on the environment. There are also non-sustainable practices which are the result of war, such as, for example, the felling of trees, an increase in pollution, as well as the destruction of infrastructure. All of that has an impact on us. Notwithstanding all of this, the government of Sudan has established a whole number of policies and plans to improve the efficiency of production and to depend less and less on fossil fuels. Ladies and gentlemen, financing, localizing, and making sustainable development financeable is something which is vital for the donor countries to help the developing countries to meet their climate change commitments. Thank you.
Thank you, Your Excellency. It is my pleasure to welcome Her Excellency Ms. Mia Sandu, President of the Republic of Moldova. Your Excellency, you have the floor.
Distinguished delegates, it's an honor to address you on behalf of the Moldovan people. My deep gratitude goes to His Excellency President Aliyev and the government of Azerbaijan for hosting COP29 in Baku. Ladies and gentlemen, Moldova exemplifies the injustice of climate change. While contributing a mere 0.03% of global emissions, we are Europe's most vulnerable country to climate impacts. For Moldova, climate change